The Star Guardian universe is flashy, magical, and highly spirited, but there is a persistent darkness behind all that. It is a story outside the canonical League of Legends timeline. The champions in this story experience events much different and unrelated to their Runeterran counterparts. Nonetheless, the Star Guardian universe is quite interesting. The story begins at the start of the universe. The first star. The first star was the first being in an entirely dark universe. Over time, it grew lonely, so it spread its starlight across the darkness, birthing galaxies, stars, planets, and all life. Everyone and everything carried a bit of the first star's starlight within it. In order to safeguard these creations, the first star selected individuals who were deemed to have a pure heart and an iron will. The first star bestowed extra starlight, fragments of the first star's essence, upon them, and they were the sworn protectors of the universe. These protectors were called Star Guardians. Those chosen were granted the ability to transform into their Star Guardian form, granting them magical powers that varied with the specific Guardian's personality and talents. They also no longer aged, giving them near immortality. Unfortunately, like their namesake, those Guardians that burned bright burnt out. It was their duty and their destiny to fight and eventually give their lives protecting the creations of the first star. Upon their death, Star Guardians returned to Starlight, to be imbued into new creations or potentially into new Guardians. The first star didn't create Star Guardians without reason. There were tangible threats to the universe. When multiple Star Guardians were created simultaneously, there was an equally large threat looming in the darkness. Given a name, the mysterious source of these threats was called the Dark Star. Much like the Star Guardians, the Dark Star had servants of its own, monsters designed to spread darkness and destroy the light. Prospective Star Guardians were approached with an option to take an oath, swearing their service to the first star. Upon accepting their Star Guardian oath, the Guardians gained a magical familiar that assisted them. Each familiar was tasked with helping their Guardians channel their magical powers. To that end, familiars often had the ability to transform into weapons. Furthermore, familiars were expected to keep their Guardian in line with the first star's wishes. As such, more unruly Guardians tended to require 2 or more familiars to accomplish this task. However, depending on the situation, some familiars may side with their Guardian over the first star. On top of that, Star Guardians are given a colored emblem to represent the state of their starlight. The first team. Teams generally consisted of a leader, a second in command, and 3 other members. The second usually acted as a lancer to contrast the leader's personality and approach to problem solving. Few specific details have been revealed about the first Star Guardian team, as much of it has been lost to time. The first team consisted of Zoe with familiar Ran, her best friend Harp with familiar Geist, Gwen with familiar Tai, Syndra with the familiar trio named Multi, and finally Akshan, whose familiar was lost to time. The first team fought in an era when the galaxy was still dark and horrific, but the team persisted, becoming a tightly bonded force for good in the universe. They meant everything to each other. Harp and Zoe were particularly close. When they weren't battling monsters of darkness, they enjoyed playing chess together. Harp burned the brightest, but she was the first to burn out. Over decades of atrocities witnessed by the Guardian, her starlight eroded. Though Syndra and Zoe tried to prevent it, Harp got twisted into an evil, undying monstrosity known as Star Nemesis Fiddlesticks. The contorted abomination trapped Harp's familiar, Geist, within its chest cavity. At this time, Gwen was also defeated. She was turned into the form of a doll and trapped within the body of another giant monster of darkness. Witnessing the horror that her best friend had become, coupled with the loss of her teammate Gwen, Zoe had a crisis. At first she was sad, then angry. She couldn't bear how the first star had allowed these atrocities to occur. Her conclusion was to turn her back on her purpose. She wasn't going to fight the darkness only to perish. This was a rejection of her calling and duty as a Star Guardian. She fell. Zoe embraced chaos and madness, growing to antagonize future generations of Star Guardians for the coming eons. She became known as the Twilight Star. The Fiddlesticks monster also pursued Star Guardians, aiming for those that were on the verge of falling. It wanted to consume their final remnants of starlight. The connection Fiddlesticks once had to the Star Guardians was lost over the course of time. This crisis revealed the existential ultimatum Star Guardians were faced with. Either fight for the first star until they are destroyed, or fall, betraying all other Star Guardians in the process. They are either supernovas exploding brightly, or collapsing stars turning light into darkness. As millennia passed, many generations of Star Guardians came and went. Some were killed by Zoe or Fiddlesticks. Others fell to darkness, betraying their comrades. Others still remained in the cosmos for centuries, set to eternally contribute to the first star's fight. Neela, from the 7th Star Guardian team, is one of these outer guardians. Abandoned Light. With Zoe still spreading chaos in the distant reaches of the galaxy, a team was called upon to finally stop her. Ari was this team's leader. Her familiar was Kiko. Sarah Fortune was the second in command, with the two familiars Baki and Boki. Then there was Zaya, who was in a relationship with teammate Rakan. Their respective familiars were Saki and Riku. Finally, Nico and familiar Toa rounded out the 5-person squad. The group was skilled enough to track Zoe down to a lonely moon. On the moon, they bravely fought the murderous fallen guardian, but the mission ended in disaster. Zoe slayed Rakan first, knowing that it would obliterate Zaya's psyche. His green eyes filled with tears, and Zaya rushed to comfort him. As Nico ran to defend the grieving Zaya, she took a harmful spell to the chest, seemingly killing her on the spot. Then Zaya was next. She laid in shock, defenselessly awaiting her fate. Sarah Fortune knelt beside her friends, trying anything she could think of to save them, but Ari dragged her away. They were forced to flee from the fight, or else they surely would have died as well. The event left traumatic scars on the two of them. Nico did manage to survive the encounter, and later escaped on her own. Zoe resurrected Zaya and Rakan as her servants, the corrupted Star Guardians. Ari and Miss Fortune were now orphans in a sense, surviving members of a defeated team. But this loss would not defeat them forever. They gathered new teammates of other orphaned guardians, namely Ezreal with familiar Yuto, Soraka with familiar Shisa, and Syndra with the familiar trio Multi. This was a powerful team of experienced Star Guardians, which was more than could be said for another team forming in Valorant City. Burning Bright. Luxana, or Lux, was the leader of a fresh batch of Star Guardians. Lux's familiar stayed in the shape of her radiant staff. Her second in command was Jinx with her familiars Kuro and Shiro. Alongside them were Lulu with familiar Pix, Poppy with her familiar in Light's hammer form, and the orphaned older guardian Janna with her familiar Zephyr. The team blended in together as typical high school students, eventually strengthening their bonds as a squad. That was, until Jinx began to wrestle with the lifetime servitude and commitment that was expected from Star Guardians. These responsibilities came as a surprise to the young Guardian, as she hadn't paid attention to the conditions of her oath before she agreed. Jinx began to reject her role, leaving the team. When Lux pleaded with her to stay, Jinx slapped Lux's outstretched hand away from her. This act greatly upset the righteous Poppy, and concerned both Lulu and Lux. Jinx was now falling in a way similar to how Zoe had many millennia prior. At school, Lux had fallen asleep, and was dreaming about her team falling from the sky. She saw her team disintegrating around her as they fell through the atmosphere. She jolted awake, seeing that Janna, Lulu, and Poppy were still safely seated at their desks. Jinx's desk, however, was empty. When a monster suddenly attacked, the team was forced to battle the massive foe without Jinx. Lux, Poppy, Lulu, and Janna fought bravely, but they were unable to slay the beast. From a great distance, Jinx watched the starlight of her team flash brightly in the sky. She eventually had a change of heart, swooping in to join her teammates with their fight. Together with Jinx's added firepower, they were able to slay the monster. The team was able to reform, despite their lingering differences. Lux and her newly reformed team would soon find themselves at odds with Ari's new star-studded squad. Starfall. Lux had been experiencing a now recurring dream. In this dream, she was alone in pure darkness. She realized that the darkness encompassing her was persistent, everlasting, and she started to panic. She was in over her head, and the darkness threatened to consume her entirely. Just as she began to give up hope, she felt warmth and light from 4 sources: Janna, Poppy, Lulu, Jinx. The 4 of them were with her, but they were all now falling from space toward a big blue planet. Lux tried to grab onto her friends to keep them from impacting the ground, but her arms began to ache and then break apart. She concluded that she wasn't strong enough to keep her team together. The final image was the darkened emblems of her fellow Star Guardians, and their light shattering into fleeting embers. Then Lux woke up. It was still night, but she didn't want to go back to sleep. She knew what dream awaited for her if she did. The next day, Jinx was lounging in the backyard, listening to music with her familiars, Shiro and Kuro. It was summer, so they didn't need to attend school. Lux was trying to get her attention, but Jinx mostly ignored her. She would rather enjoy what remained of her summer vacation than do whatever it was Lux wanted from her. The leader persisted, eventually convincing Jinx to join her by bribing her with the popsicles Poppy had bought. They were shaped like rockets to boot. Sweets and ammunition were two of Jinx's favorite things. Once the two Star Guardians had entered the house, Lux was confronted with another challenge. Poppy was standing on a chair in front of the stove, messily preparing pancakes for Lulu. Pancake batter and syrup had made a mess of the floor, the counter, the refrigerator, and somehow the ceiling. Lulu was at the table, coloring with one hand and using her other hand to eat the pancakes Poppy had made. Her familiar Pix was chewing on a green marker. Jinx and Poppy quickly got into a spat over making a pancake shaped like a missile. As they wrestled over control of the griddle, Lux stood in shock at the chaotic scene. On the bright side, Jana and her familiar Zephyr were absent-mindedly cleaning dishes while staring out the window. Lux began to speak to her team. She wanted to discuss how they were going to approach the start of the new school year, but as soon as she started talking, Jinx interrupted by asking Lulu about her drawing. The drawing had the 5 teammates in a field surrounded by trees, but there were others as well, colorful lights among the stars. Lulu called them the new stars. Poppy dismissed the idea, claiming that there were no new stars. This caused Jana to fumble her dishes. Lux knew that Jana was usually more collected than that and figured something was up. Regardless, Lux looked back at Lulu's drawing. She read the words at the bottom. Camp Targon Summer Star Fall. A local university's astronomy class was holding an event for high schoolers. They were welcome to attend a viewing of the summer meteor shower. Lux decided the event would be good for the group. She told the team to pack their bags. They were going to summer camp. Upon arrival at Camp Targon, Jinx quickly took off in search of the camp's pool. Poppy quickly corrected her, saying it was a lake, Lake Lunari. The bus driver struggled to hand Poppy her bag, which she carried with ease. Lux then challenged her team to fit in and act as normal campers without Star Guardian abilities. Jana was zoning out again, staring into the sky. She claimed there was a storm coming, even though the sky itself was clear. Poppy took Lulu to start setting up their campsite, while Lux and Jana approached the check-in table. Lux approached the table to check in her team and pick up an informational pamphlet, but she hesitated as she saw a young woman with long black hair and bangs concealing her left eye. Lux assumed she was too composed and self-assured to be a high school student, so she must have been an astronomy student from the university. Lux introduced herself and her team, the Star Sisters. The woman lightly mocked the team's name, and Lux caught a glimpse of the woman's name tag, Syndra. Jana supported Lux through the unpleasant interaction. Syndra handed Lux the informational pamphlets and informed her of her responsibilities as a team leader. Since the meteor shower was best viewed after midnight, it was the leader's responsibility to keep the team together once it was dark. 4 other campers showed up behind Syndra, just as cool and confident. Lux was instantly starstruck by them, as were other passers-by. Syndra derisively told Lux that that was what a real team looked like. Then she called out to her team leader, Ari. Syndra made her way to join her team. Ari was the perfect leader. Beside her, a taller redhead, Sarah Fortune. Then a quiet girl with mint-colored hair, Soraka. And to round out the 5-person squad was a blonde boy that Lux thought was somewhat cute, Ezreal. Individually, they exuded a particular awesomeness, but they also moved flawlessly as a unit. Lux found herself envious of their clear, effortless cohesion and their sheer talent. Lux attempted to introduce herself to Ari, but the far too cool and popular girl grew bored after only a few words into Lux's introduction. Ari let Lux's extended hand hang awkwardly in the air for a few moments before she accepted it with a half-hearted handshake. Ari never even gave her her own name. Surely Lux already knew it. Ari turned her back to speak with Syndra and her squad, leaving Lux to sheepishly return to Jana. Lux accidentally bumped into the absent-minded Jana, falling to the ground and dropping the camp flyers. When Lux looked up at Jana, she wore a scowl on her face. She wasn't annoyed that Lux had bumped her, but there was something clearly wrong. Jana said she had to take a walk, and she wasn't asking for permission. Lux had never seen her teammate this angry before. Jana took off, leaving Lux alone minutes after Syndra had told her to keep her team together. And at that moment, Lux heard a chuckling from behind her. Lux turned her head and met Syndra's mocking gaze. Lux gathered the fallen pamphlets and left. She wanted to get as far away from these popular kids as possible. Lux wandered the campsite, replaying the previous events in her mind. Eventually, she realized she had no clue where she was, and none of the pamphlets she had was a map. She began to doubt herself as a leader. Tears of anger and frustration gathered in her eyes. She spoke to herself, asking, how could someone lead if they didn't even know where they were going? Then a voice surprised her in response, claiming maps were totally overrated. It was the blonde boy from Ari and Syndra's perfect team, Ezreal. The boy offered Lux a map of the campsite and introduced himself as Ezreal with the nickname Ez. Lux wiped her eyes and questioned if Ezreal was trying to flirt with her. They walked back toward the main campsite, and Lux's mood lightened as they exchanged some playful banter. Lux jokingly claimed her mother loved lamps, which explained how she got her name. As they stepped onto a larger trail returning to the camp, they crossed paths with Jinx. Lux introduced the two, and Jinx quickly made things uncomfortable by aggressively approaching Ezreal and asking what his intentions toward Lux were. Ezreal stammered for a bit before regaining his cool. Then another person joined the group, another from Ari's team, the apparent second in command. The tall redhead asked Ezreal if everything was alright. She had seen Jinx's demeanor and wasn't very happy with the display. Ezreal tried to smooth out the situation by telling her things were alright, addressing her as Sarah. Lux introduced herself, and also addressed her as Sarah, to which the redhead replied, Sarah was reserved for her friends. Lux could see that she was not one of them. Others were to call her Misfortune. As an attempt to save her first impression with Misfortune, Lux brought up the camp's food. There were snacks, cookies, and oranges. Of course, Misfortune hated oranges, and coldly turned to leave, dragging Ezreal along with her. Misfortune said Ari wanted them to patrol the camp's perimeter before it got dark. Jinx mocked Ezreal as he left, prompting Lux to lightly jab her in the shoulder. Jinx and Lux made it back to their campsite, finding Poppy angrily chopping firewood. She was evidently upset that she had been left to single-handedly prepare the camp. Still, Lulu rushed to greet Lux with a big hug. Jinx shared a cookie with Lulu, likely because she felt bad that she had eaten the rest, but also to annoy Poppy further. Jinx excitedly reached for her familiar in order to use its firepower to light a campfire, but she was reminded by Lux that they weren't allowed to use their powers. Jinx scowled, and Jana lit a match instead. Jinx then upended her duffel bag, dumping out bags upon bags of marshmallows. Apparently, all she had packed for the trip were marshmallows and a towel. Lux checked in with Jana to make sure she was feeling okay. Jana said she simply needed some fresh air, but something was still amiss. Lulu joined in and asked Jana to tell a story. Jinx upgraded the request to a ghost story since they were camping. Jana relented and told a story about the first Star Guardian who rejected their destiny and fell to evil and chaos. After the story, there was an eerie quietness. Lux broke the silence by suggesting the team catch some shut-eye before the meteor shower began. The team agreed. Jana brought the already sleeping Lulu to a tent. When Lux moved to follow, Poppy stopped her. Poppy said Lux was in the same tent as Jinx, since Poppy didn't want to be bothered by Jinx's snoring. When Lux slept, her recurring dream returned. The darkness was the same, but now her and her teammates were at the bottom of a well. Above them, stars in the sky began to flicker and fade. Everyone was asking for Lux's help, but she couldn't move. Shattered pieces of Star Guardian emblems floated down into the well like ashes after a fire. Lux was woken up by a combination of Poppy jumping on her and Jinx pouring a canteen of water on her face. Lux was initially annoyed with her teammates, but her annoyance gave way to concern as they revealed that Lulu and Jana were missing. Jana could typically handle herself, but Lulu was a different story. Lux checked their tent and saw the drawing that Lulu had made resting on Jana's pillow. Though they expressed it in different ways, Jinx and Poppy were also clearly worried. Lux instructed them to grab their weapons and familiars. Without question, they would blow their cover as Star Guardians in order to keep their friends safe. Lux's staff illuminated the darkness as the Star Sisters searched the campsite for Jana and Lulu. They moved beyond the boundaries of Camp Targon and came across a meadow similar to the one in Lulu's drawing. There was a low fog in the air, misty in the cool moonlight. Overhead, the meteor shower was beginning. In the center of the meadow, atop a checkered picnic blanket, was Lulu, safe and sound. A gentle breeze blew away some of the fog, revealing Jana, happy to see everyone safe. She was somewhat out of breath, as she too had been searching the area for Lulu. Lulu hopped to her feet and jumped up to hug Lux. But the cheerful reunion was short-lived. The ground began to shake and crack, revealing a sickly green glow from beneath. The team gripped their weapons. Lulu reassured the group that new stars were coming. Dark, dog-sized insectoids crawled out from the cracks of the ground. A swarm of giant insects emerged and began to make their way toward Camp Targon. Lux quickly shot off a laser, obliterating the nearest insect into a pile of green goo. As other insects took to the air, Lux instructed the team to prevent any from reaching the campground. It was their duty to protect the innocent. Jinx excitedly hopped into the fray, wildly shooting down the insects. Poppy too swung her hammer, squashing any who crossed her path. Jana gathered the winds and sent a tornado through the pack of enemies, sending them flying into the thick tree trunks surrounding the clearing. Even with all that, the team was still hopelessly outnumbered. Lulu calmly pointed upward and welcomed the new stars. 5 brightly colored trails of light streaked through the sky. They were heading straight for the clearing. They landed simultaneously, as if they had been one being. Many of the insectoids exploded from the force of their impact. As the dust settled, Lux's eyes widened. She recognized the 5 individuals. It was that popular girl, Ari, and her cool friends, Miss Fortune, Ezreal, Syndra, and even the quiet girl with mint hair. Curiously, even in her Star Guardian form, Syndra was wearing an eye patch that was covering her left eye. Regardless, Ari's team quickly set to dispatching the insectoids with lethal coordination. Lux was somewhat dumbfounded that these people were all Star Guardians as well. Of course, they were all too busy to answer any of her long list of questions. They showed a choreographed dance of shooting, dashing, charming, glowing orb throwing, and starlight calling that ended in victory. It was over moments after the new Star Guardians had arrived. The insectoids were destroyed. Each of the new Guardians held a victory pose, as if they knew how heroic they seemed to Lux and the others. But perhaps the posing had been a bit premature, as the ground began to shake once again, knocking Lux off her feet. She hit her head, as an insectoid double the size of an elephant emerged alongside another wave of the creatures. Ezreal dashed in to help Lux to her feet. The two teams fought side by side. Poppy suggested that Jinx shoot one of her oversized rockets so that she could ride the projectile toward the giant enemy. The plan excited Jinx so much that she gave Poppy a hug beforehand. Poppy then sailed through the air, riding the rocket toward the creature's head. She hopped upward as the rocket collided with the creature. As she descended, she swung her hammer, crashing it against the creature's skull. As the oversized insect reeled, Lux gathered Starlight into her wand. She fired off a beam of light that burst clean through the creature's head. As the defeated creature fell to the ground, Lux noticed that Lulu was in its path. Lux dove down and shoved Lulu out of the way of the collapsing body. She, however, was knocked unconscious as pieces of the body fell atop her. When Lux came to, it was daytime. Birds were chirping. There was a gentle breeze rustling the flaps of her tent. She opened her eyes to see Ari seated at the foot of her bed. Ari gave Lux some water and informed her that everyone had made it out safely. Ari commended Lux on her bravery, stepping in to protect a teammate. Lux said that any Star Guardian would have done the same. For a moment, Ari's perfect expression twinged with darkness. She disagreed. Ari knew all too well that not all Star Guardians were so selfless. Ari stood and instructed Lux and her team to stay put to heal up. Ari claimed her team would handle any more trouble that would arise in the area. As Ari left, Lux tried once more to get them to join forces and fight together. It was their destiny as Star Guardians. With bitterness, Ari said, "Destiny is such an ugly word." Then she left Lux on her own. But in reality, Lux wasn't on her own. She rose from her bed to catch up with Jinx, Lulu, Poppy, and Jana. They were still at the camp, and as Jinx said, summer wasn't going to last forever. The Slumber Party Summoning. After her encounter with a sharper, more coordinated team of Star Guardians, Lux devised a plan for her team to bond and grow closer. She told her team that they were having a Star Guardian meeting. When Jinx resisted, Lux claimed it was mandatory. Lulu heard this and figured it best that she invite the members from Ari's team as well, seeing as it was a mandatory Star Guardian meeting. Lux had planned for the meeting to be a surprise slumber party for team bonding purposes. On the evening of the event, she was preparing dinner when a knock arrived at the door. Lux opened it, shocked to find the perfectly cool members of Ari's team. Lux panicked and quickly closed the door in their faces. They weren't supposed to be there. When Lux questioned their appearance, Lulu revealed her misunderstanding, but it was too late now. Lux opened the door once more and greeted the three, Ezreal, Soraka, and an understandably annoyed Sarah Fortune. Lux reminded herself that it was Miss Fortune to her. Miss Fortune furiously tapped on her phone, surely sending an angry text. The quiet Soraka stood behind the two others, holding a box of baked goods from Pantheon's pastries. Lulu broke the awkward standoff by grabbing Ezreal and Miss Fortune by the wrists and pulling them inside. Soraka followed, handing the box of baked goods to Lux. "Cinnamon rolls," she whispered before catching up to her teammates. Lux heard Lulu from the living room. "Welcome to our Star Guardian sleepover party." Lux was stood in the doorway, holding a box of pastries and still wearing her oven mitts. The clock on the oven timer ticked through a silent room. It was uncomfortably quiet. Ezreal was seated on the couch, flanked by Soraka and Fortune, who was still on her phone. Soraka quietly chewed on a cinnamon roll while she watched Lulu fold a piece of construction paper. Janna and Poppy were seated on folding chairs, both remaining silent. Lux was pacing back and forth, wondering what to do. Miss Fortune broke the tension with a sigh, placing her phone face down in her lap. Ezreal piped up, starting conversation and asking the other team if they often got together in this manner. Poppy stared at him. She couldn't figure out how someone like him was even chosen as a Star Guardian in the first place. Janna was polite enough to respond. She asked if Ari's team didn't typically gather like this. Ezreal started to explain, but looked to Miss Fortune before trailing off. After an eye roll from Fortune, Ezreal continued. He stated that since trouble was out and about, the team should be as well. There wasn't much time for sitting around at home. Poppy asked if that was why Syndra wasn't present. Janna tensed up at hearing her name. Soraka quietly switched the subject to the absent Jinx, asking if she was planning on coming. Lux answered that Jinx was always late, fashionably so. Right on cue, Jinx exploded through the front door, yelling and sauntering into the living room. Her enthusiasm crumbled into a sigh as her eyes fell upon Ezreal. Jinx looked over to Lulu's folded piece of paper. It was a paper fortune teller, a game elementary school students would play to pass the time. On the paper fortune teller were small flaps that indicated how many times the holder would need to open and close the crafted toy. The flap that was revealed after opening and closing contained the player's fate. Lulu asked if anybody wanted to give her a number. Miss Fortune smirked and gave Lulu 246. Without blinking, Lulu wrote down the large value and started a round with Soraka. Miss Fortune scoffed at the childishness and sarcastically asked if they braided each other's hair as well. Poppy and Janna quickly came to Lulu's defense, even though Lulu hadn't noticed. She was busy playing with Soraka. Miss Fortune sighed and returned her attention to her phone. Lux suggested that they stop the usual slumber party activities and simply discuss Star Guardian matters. Jinx refused. She offered a more consequential game instead. Ezreal leaned forward, saying he was in. He had fallen for Jinx's trap. She turned to face him and asked, "Truth or dare?" Ezreal hesitated, not knowing how to respond. Janna saved him by saying truth. Poppy claimed the rules were that whoever responded first got to play. A dissatisfied Jinx relented and asked Janna if she was older than Poppy's hammer. She wasn't, but the question did make Janna blush in embarrassment. Poppy felt a certain pride in learning the age of her hammer. It was Janna's turn to ask. She targeted Soraka, who was still watching Lulu count on the paper fortune teller. Soraka's familiar Shisa eyed the ongoings with a suspicious frown. Soraka replied truth. Janna asked Soraka what she remembered, but Poppy interfered, saying that wasn't a true or false question. Janna tried again, asking Soraka if it was true that she remembered when the first star was whole, prior to spreading its starlight across the universe. Soraka answered true. The room fell silent again. Everyone was curious, but the game continued. Soraka targeted Ezreal. Ezreal placed his hands behind his head and leaned back, acting as nonchalant as possible. This provoked Miss Fortune to bop him with a pillow. He chose dare. Soraka dared him to create a portal using his familiar Yuto. Poppy quickly intervened, saying portals sounded dangerous, but Ezreal was sure he could handle it. It wasn't a true portal. Rather, Ezreal passed briefly through another realm. As Ezreal prepared his display of magic, Lulu spoke up with her counting. 244, 245, 246. Ezreal blinked out of sight, reappearing above Lulu and grabbing the paper toy. A moment later, he reappeared on the sofa and read the fortune. Only in darkness can the light shine brightly. Lulu claimed that was what the first star told her to write. The room was filled with questions once more. Soraka remembered the first star, but apparently the first star spoke directly to Lulu. Before anyone could inquire further, the folded paper in Ezreal's hands began to shake. It shot out of his grasp and moved around the room as if possessed. The paper unfolded itself before spitting out a small, glowing green and black creature. All the Star Guardians hopped to their feet. The creature began romping around the home, while Ezreal apologized for inadvertently allowing the creature to tag along through his realm hopping. Poppy swung her hammer at the creature as it climbed upon a coffee table. The creature dodged, and Poppy's hammer obliterated the table, sending splinters around the room. Gianna started to gather wind to subdue the creature before both Jinx and Miss Fortune aimed their weapons at it. Lux's stomach dropped as the creature's path momentarily intersected with her head. Miss Fortune pulled the trigger. Lux's hands went to her face, feeling it and ensuring she was still intact. When she opened her eyes, the creature had exploded into a million pieces of small white paper, raining down like snow. Lulu started dancing in the confetti. A smoke alarm started going off. Lux had been so distracted by the commotion that she had forgotten that she was cooking dinner. She went to the kitchen to check on it, and all that remained was a burnt mess. Lux felt her eyes well up in the smoky ruin that she had created. She heard footsteps join her in the smoky kitchen. Lux assumed it was Janna, or maybe Ezreal, coming to comfort her, but it was Fortune. Lux began to apologize for wasting their Friday night, calling her Miss Fortune in the process. Miss Fortune corrected her. She preferred to be called Sarah by her friends. Sarah Fortune's phone vibrated, but she ignored it and apologized for aiming her pistol near Lux's head. She declared that she would never hurt another Star Guardian. The statement hinted at a past that Lux didn't know. Miss Fortune reassured Lux that the party wasn't ruined. There was still plenty of Soraka's cinnamon rolls, and Ezreal had already ordered pizza. Lulu skipped into the kitchen, holding an armful of white flannel outfits. She gave one to Lux and another to Miss Fortune. After inspection, the outfits were pajamas, crafted specifically for the individual guardians. Miss Fortune smiled at Lux, saying the pajama party thing could be fun. Furthermore, she claimed she had always wondered what Ezreal would look like with braided hair. The Twilight Stars approach. Sometime later, Lulu had drawn something again. Something potentially dangerous. Given how her drawings had been turning out, Lux thought it best to look into. Lux reached out to Ahri's team for assistance, but Ezreal was in detention. Soraka needed to cover a shift at Pantheons, and Syndra had to attend an astronomy lecture. Miss Fortune was the only one available to respond. Lux and Sarah Fortune patrolled Valorant City, and Lux inquired about Ahri. Miss Fortune vaguely replied that her team's leader had been busy lately. The rest of Lux's team was passing the time at a nearby park. Lux unfolded Lulu's drawing to verify the location. The drawing clearly depicted power lines of the city and the structures of a typical playground. Lulu held up her hand and pointed toward the sky. She was pointing at a bright spot that was known as the Twilight Star. Poppy commented on the misnomer since it wasn't really a star. Lulu replied, saying everything had starlight in it, to which Janna nodded in agreement. Sarah Fortune commented on Lux's teammates and their apparent innocence. When Lux began to explain, Fortune gazed into the distance, saying that being innocent wasn't necessarily a bad thing. She claimed Lux reminded her of someone she had lost a long time ago, a girl with pink hair. Miss Fortune went on to compare Lux to her lost teammates, an innocent one, a loyal one, and a dreamer. Lux was something of a mix of all of them. Lulu shouted again from the playground. The sky was darkening unnaturally quickly. Lux and Miss Fortune hurried over to join the squad. Overhead, dozens of sparkly spheres descended like bubbles. Poppy slowly dodged one as it fell, prompting Jinx to laugh and claim they were harmless. As if on cue, the bubbles seemed to target Jinx and hone in on her. Lux quickly threw her wand above Jinx's head to generate a light barrier that deflected the spheres. The deflected bubbles popped against the ground and park structures, leaving a puff of dark mist, black bugs, and the sound of a high-pitched giggle like that of a child. The laugh was ominous and off-putting enough to prompt the team to start popping the bubbles before they could cause any harm. Janna gathered the wind to corral the spheres. Near the center of the gathered bubbles, a portal opened, and through it emerged some kind of dark, octopus-like creature, with ears and a glowing eye. The team wasted no time in attacking it. Poppy knocked it to the ground with her hammer, but the creature recovered, changing direction and drawing spheres towards Sarah Fortune. Lux aimed a beam of light at the creature, but it managed to dip around the attack and continue toward Miss Fortune. In the nick of time, Lulu knocked Misfortune away from the attack. One of the bubbles popped gently against Lulu's cheek. For a moment, time was still. Then the small Star Guardian was enveloped by a black cloud. Lulu collapsed to the ground in a heap. The creature took off through a portal. Maniacal laughter could be heard from the other side. The Guardians were left to tend to their fallen teammate. Lux checked Lulu's vitals. She was still breathing as if she was merely sleeping. Lulu shifted in her unconscious state, murmuring and fidgeting as if she were trapped in a nightmare. Then she jolted awake, exclaiming that she was coming. Lux turned to Misfortune and asked her to contact Ari. They were going to need help. Misfortune revealed that she hadn't been able to reach Ari since the night of the slumber party. Ari was supposed to be there that night, but something had come up, something she refused to let Misfortune help with. Light and Shadow. Back during the events of the slumber party, Ari learned that her former teammates Zaya, Rakan, and Nico were still out in the distant parts of the galaxy. Nico was currently being pursued by the Twilight Star, Zoe, and the corrupted versions of Zaya and Rakan. Ari informed Misfortune via text that she would not be able to attend Lux's meeting, and took off to find her former teammates. Ari knew that if she explained why she wasn't attending, Misfortune would insist on coming, so she left it vague. The clever Nico had been outmaneuvering her pursuers for a long while now, but they were finally catching up with her. Zaya threw flurry after flurry of sharpened, dagger-like feathers at Nico, trying to pin her down, but between Nico's magical holograms and acrobatics, she was able to escape unharmed. Unfortunately for her, almost every counterattack aimed at Zaya was erased by Rakan's support. Even in his corrupted state, Rakan would never let harm fall upon his beloved Zaya. Nico knew this though, and used it to her advantage. She transformed herself to mimic Zaya, causing Rakan to inadvertently defend the disguised Nico. When he realized what he had done, he sacrificed his own health to heal the real Zaya. She immediately continued her pursuit. Nico fled to a high central room of an old tower. Then Zoe herself showed up through a portal. The chaotic Twilight Star then opened a second portal, allowing Zaya and Rakan to enter the room as well. Zaya rose into the air and unleashed a barrage of daggers at her target. Zoe joined the assault by casting a magical spell. Nico responded with her ultimate ability. She briefly gained a magical barrier before unleashing a blast of stunning magical light in a wide radius around her. Zoe narrowly escaped the blast by dipping into a new portal, while Rakan was forced to cover for Zaya, taking the full damage of the blast to protect her. The blast caused structural damage to the tower, causing portions of the floor to crumble and fall downward. Zoe and Nico traded blows while falling through the air, but of course this type of chaotic scene lent itself in Zoe's favor. Zoe finally unleashed her chaotic magic onto Nico, forcing her to give into her fear and doubt. Nico was on the brink of falling, nearly joining Zoe's cause, when Ari burst onto the scene. Her sudden appearance reinvigorated Nico, allowing them to force Zoe's retreat. Twin Stars. Here, the focus of the story shifts to follow Misfortune, as well as a new duo of characters, namely the children Akali and Kaisa. One night, Akali came across a group of 5 other children harming a lost puppy. Akali could not stand for that and interceded in order to get the other children to knock it off. The 5 other kids turned on her, shoved her to the ground, and kicked at her before getting chased off by a passerby. Akali laid on her back for a while, admiring the stars in the sky. The passerby asked if Akali was okay, and if she had been knocked out. Akali replied saying that she had been knocked down, and simply found it cozy, so she decided to stay. The passerby laughed and helped Akali to her feet. It was a pink-haired girl, one that Akali just now recognized. It was her middle school classmate, Kaisa. Just as rough and tumble as Akali was, Kaisa was clean and prim. Different as they worked together to track down the lost puppy. It was remarkably dirty, potentially more dirt than dog. The dog wagged its tail as Kaisa held it. Akali said that it looked like Kaisa had made a new friend. Kaisa replied that she had made 2. Of course, Kaisa volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, so they dropped the puppy off there and made plans to grab ramen the following day. When Akali returned home, her mother lectured her for fighting. She was reprimanded and called a delinquent, but that day Akali could only think of herself as a friend. As the children grew, the duo took to wandering the city after school, offering assistance to the people of Valoran City, and even breaking up some more fights. Kaisa called them a bona fide crime-fighting duo, even though it was done partly to keep Akali from starting trouble herself. Years later, best friends Akali and Kaisa were at the Valorant City Park. They were headed to the mall together, but were now entering into an argument. Kaisa had been running herself ragged with all of her extracurricular activities and selfless behaviors. Akali was expressing her concern for Kaisa's health. Akali said she wasn't going to sit idly by and watch Kaisa sacrifice herself for others. Kaisa felt overwhelmed and asked to be left alone. Akali stormed off toward the mall, knowing it was likely the wrong thing to do. She blamed herself for letting the argument get out of hand. Akali looked at the friendship bracelet she shared with Kaisa and decided she should buy her friend a gift as an apology. She rummaged through her wallet as she made a purchase at a flower stand. Also at Valorant City Mall, Miss Fortune, Lux, Ezreal, Jinx, Janna, Poppy, Lulu, and Soraka were on a shopping trip. Ahri and Syndra were the only team members that weren't present. Miss Fortune was focused on her phone, checking it every minute to see if Ahri had contacted her. They still hadn't heard from her since the slumber party. Miss Fortune welcomed the shopping trip as a distraction from her worries. She sat on a bench and watched Poppy hand an ice cream cone to a drooling Lulu. She then turned her head to see Soraka and Janna at the food court. They were locked in a 10-minute battle of politeness, both insisting that the other order first, and accidentally upsetting the line of customers behind them. Ezreal was joking around with Lux in front of a lamp store. Jinx was with them, glaring at Ezreal without blinking. Miss Fortune's thoughts drifted back to Ahri, and then to their lost fight with Zoe. Ahri had changed after that. In truth, they both had. Miss Fortune didn't like getting close to people, and Ahri didn't like letting others put themselves in harm's way. Interestingly, Lux had been a small exception in both cases. Miss Fortune's attention snapped back to reality as an overhead object whizzed by and impacted a nearby flower stand. Akali was knocked to the ground, hitting her head. When she opened her eyes, she saw smoke and flower petals raining through the sky. In their center, where there once was a flower stand, now stood a couple, a man and a woman, sharing some insidious yet playful banter. This was their homecoming, their grand entrance. The corrupted Star Guardians, Xayah and Rakan. With feathered capes and gemstones, Akali thought they looked ridiculous. The corrupted Star Guardians were intent on destroying Valorant City. Miss Fortune rose to her feet, welcoming the newest distraction. The other Star Guardians also hopped into action, with the exception of Lulu, who continued eating her ice cream. Janna cleared the dust and debris from the air, giving the Star Guardians their vision back. Miss Fortune laid eyes on the corrupted Guardians. Rakan gave a mocking bow. Xayah only glared. Memories flooded back through her mind. She remembered Rakan's green eyes filling with tears, and Xayah motionless in a black puddle. She remembered a maniacal child's laughter, and Ahri's arms dragging her away from the scene. She whispered their names, and then regained her focus. Miss Fortune and Xayah simultaneously shouted for the Star Guardians. Miss Fortune called them to action, while Xayah cursed at their existence. In plain sight of onlookers, the Guardians called their respective familiars to their sides and underwent their transformations from everyday street clothes into their elegant, heroic Guardian wear. The light emitted from the 8 simultaneous transformations was momentarily blinding. Miss Fortune's familiars Boki and Baki briefly caught eyes with Saki and Riku, Xayah and Rakan's respective familiars. Miss Fortune reassured them, or maybe herself, that these two were not the Xayah and Rakan that they once knew. Xayah questioned if Sarah was still lying to herself, and threw her daggers. Miss Fortune shot the daggers out of the air, but was surprised to see a follow-up volley that had already been launched. Ezreal blinked in to deflect the follow-up attack, and was rushed by Rakan. Rakan stabbed Ezreal in the chest. The attack glanced off his emblem and narrowly missed his heart. Overhead, Jinx and her familiars Kuro and Shiro rained a storm of bullets down on the corrupted Guardians. The scene became one of flashing colored lights, and attacks exchanging back and forth. It was clear that the corrupted Guardians had an increased power since they could hold their own against the 8 Guardians. Rakan feinted toward Poppy, dodging her hammer swing and opening her up for Xayah's next attack. Lulu hurled her familiar picks at Xayah's face, catching her off guard, and buying time for Lux to shoot an orb of binding light at the corrupted Guardians, rooting them in place. Lux took the opportunity to ask why they were attacking Valorant City. Fortune said that they shouldn't be here. Xayah retorted that Fortune shouldn't have left them to die either. Miss Fortune fired her shaky pistol at Xayah, prompting Rakan to soar to her side, protecting her with a magical shield. Xayah implied that Ahri simply wanted Fortune to think they had died, or perhaps that they never could have been saved. Miss Fortune began to question that moment back then as well. Lux's gaze fell upon a young girl cowering in the wreckage of a flower stand. Lux ordered Miss Fortune to get the girl to safety and to find reinforcements, Syndra or maybe Ahri. Misfortune began to refuse, but knew Lux was right. She wouldn't be able to fight her former teammates at full force. Misfortune moved next to the trembling girl, scooping her up after recognizing she was in shock. As they fled, Zaya chided her, asking if she always ran away, and threw a dagger in her direction. With a gust, Janna knocked the dagger off course, prompting Rakan to give chase. He was suddenly hit in the head by Pix, while Lulu waved goodbye to her friend Sarah. Soraka guided Misfortune's escape path with a swirl of Starlight. Zaya shouted that this was yet another time Misfortune was abandoning her friends to die. When Akali regained her senses, she was running, being led by the wrist by Sarah Fortune. Akali tore away and kicked at her. Fortune shouted at the younger girl, but the confused, panicked, and potentially concussed Akali took off running. As she ran, she looked upward. Streaks of darkness were bolting across the sky, crashing into buildings and street lamps, inciting panic among the populace. Akali slowed her pace as she stared at the flashing streaks of light and darkness. It wasn't just the mall. The whole city was under attack. Misfortune caught up to Akali and tried to clarify the situation. Of course, it was difficult for Akali to discern the good magical beings from the bad. Suddenly, a purple streak flew across the sky, crashing into the nearby park where Akali and Kaisa had split up. Misfortune's focus changed, wondering if that purple streak was from Syndra. Out of concern for Kaisa's safety, Akali took off running in the park's direction. She shouted that she wasn't going to leave her friend to die, like Misfortune apparently had. For a moment, Misfortune was going to let Akali run headfirst into danger, in light of her bratty attitude and rude comment. But Sarah couldn't let that happen. She again gave chase after Akali. As she searched, she was reminded of how destructive Zoe's magic was. She tried her hardest to avoid thinking about their first encounter. When Sarah caught up to Akali, she was desperately digging through a pile of rubble, attempting to free whoever was beneath it. When another portion of overhead debris was knocked loose, Misfortune rushed in to save Akali from getting crushed. It was too late for whoever was trapped beneath the rubble. Akali sobbed, saying there might have still been a chance to save them. Misfortune had once said the same thing to Ari. Misfortune took off and flew through the sky, now searching for Syndra. All the while, Akali was struggling in her grasp. Akali eventually explained that she needed to find Kaisa and make sure she was safe. Even though she knew there were bigger threats to deal with, Sarah Fortune promised to find Akali's friend Kaisa. She dropped Akali off in front of an arcade and returned to the sky in order to search for Kaisa. As Misfortune landed at the park, she was greeted by Zaya and Rakan. Somehow they had escaped from the other Star Guardians and had made their way there. Misfortune briefly thought she had indeed abandoned her team to die yet again. There wasn't time to dwell, as Zaya launched herself at Misfortune, aiming to tackle her to the ground. A blast of wind erupted, sending Zaya crashing backward into Rakan, knocking them down in a tangled heap. Janna and Soraka entered the park, carrying Poppy and Lulu on their shoulders. Behind them was Jinx, kneeling between Lux and Ezreal, aiming her rocket launcher. She fired. The rocket sailed through the air, clipping through Rakan's wing and exploding in the distance. It wasn't a direct hit, but Jinx celebrated regardless. Ezreal blinked forward and wrestled the injured Rakan to the ground. This prompted Zaya to come to his aid. Jinx opened fire on Zaya, pinning her down behind cover. Lux agreed to keep the corrupted Star Guardians busy, while Misfortune continued searching for Syndra and Akali's friend. Eventually, Fortune found Syndra, standing in front of a little girl who was sitting on a swing. But Misfortune knew all too well that this wasn't a little girl. It was the murderous, destructive fallen Star Guardian, Zoe. Syndra spoke to Misfortune, not daring to take her eyes off of Zoe. She said Misfortune shouldn't be here. Regardless, Misfortune gathered her courage to stand beside her teammate. Misfortune was surprised that Syndra seemed unharmed, having fought solo against the Twilight Star. Zaya then approached them from behind, and Zoe quickly got to the core of the matter. At their first encounter, Rakan and Nico had died, but she posed the question, what about Zaya? Misfortune didn't reply. She couldn't seem to remember if Zaya had already been killed or not. Zoe cast a spell of darkness that hit Misfortune from behind, knocking her to her knees in pain. Zaya kicked at Misfortune's wound, prompting Syndra to fire off 3 purple spells in defense of her teammate. Zoe yawned as she generated a portal to absorb the attack. Zaya then turned to fight against Syndra. They exchanged attacks before Rakan caught up to the group, followed by Lux and the remaining Star Guardians. Zaya returned her attention to Misfortune, claiming she watched her and Ari run away. Zaya said she had called out to them. She cried out for help, but they left her to die. Misfortune could feel the growing doubt and fear sprawl out from the wound on her back. She couldn't see anything but Zaya, with Zoe behind her. Zaya kept questioning Sarah, chipping away at her psyche. Sarah was crying, remembering the traumatic fight. Rakan wasn't breathing. Zaya wasn't moving. The wound on her back grew, feasting on misfortune's sorrow. She whispered to herself that it wasn't her fault, but eventually her whispers changed to believing that it was her fault, that she had abandoned her friend. A voice cut through the clouds in her mind. It simply said, "Don't give up." That voice belonged to a young girl covered with dirt and dried blood. It was Akali's friend, Kaisa. Kaisa continued to encourage Misfortune to resist Zoe's negative influence. Kaisa's passionate plea reinvigorated Misfortune. It reminded her of her promise to Akali. It reminded her of her own friends. Zoe began throwing a tantrum, seeing her most recent plot foiled before her eyes. Fissures cracked the ground beneath Zoe's stomping feet. Zaya and Rakan were knocked off balance, giving the Guardians a chance to attack Zoe directly. However, this would leave the young Kaisa defenseless. If Zoe wanted to, she could obliterate the child in an instant. At that moment, 2 stars descended from the sky, landing on either side of Misfortune. Misfortune lifted her eyes to see Ari and Nico, both offering a hand to help her to her feet. The positive scene caused Zoe to entirely lose control of her temper. Her tantrum evolved into a constant screeching that caused the whole atmosphere to shake violently. Pools of pink liquid began to boil over from the fissures, setting the ground ablaze. Then the screeching gave way to laughter. Countless dark star attacks fell from the sky, pelting the park as Zoe began to undergo a transformation. Her features deformed, and her body contorted and stretched. She grew taller than trees, and then taller still. Nico helped the injured Misfortune to her feet as they fell back. Rakan was seated near Zaya, shielding her from the falling stars. Jinx fired a shot at Zoe, but it phased through her like a ghost. Nico explained that she had seen this form before, and Zoe was presently made of chaos. They would have to wait until she returned to flesh. However, while Zoe was in this state, she also couldn't attack the Guardians. Misfortune wanted answers from Ari. She needed to know how she had brought back Nico and why she wasn't informed during Nico's rescue. Furthermore, she needed to know what really happened to Zaya and Rakan on the night of their defeat. But all that had to wait as a falling star nearly hit Kaisa. Sarah moved to protect the girl and mentioned that Akali had sent her to find her. On cue, Akali sprinted into the park, shouting Kaisa's name. Kaisa sprinted back toward her. They embraced each other amidst the chaos. Zoe was now a mountain-sized glowing mass of distorted colors. Once the falling dark star attack momentarily ceased, Zaya and Rakan were able to resume their battle with the Guardians. Janna quickly encircled them in a tornado to keep them pacified for the moment. Ari commanded that Sarah bring the 2 girls to safety. Like before, Misfortune began to protest, but relented. She had taken the most damage from the battle, and Ari couldn't bear risking another teammate. Janna's tornado faded, and Zaya charged to engage Nico. She threw a dagger that pierced Nico's chest. Then, that hologram erupted into a puff of magical dust. The real Nico emerged and knocked Zaya off her feet before fleeing into the nearby tree line. Before Sarah was able to leave the scene, a stray attack from Rakan hit her in the shoulder. Then, the ground began to shake once more, and everyone turned their attention to the gigantic monster Zoe. Zoe was solidifying into her titanic form, shaking the air with her shudders. The various Star Guardians took to the air, flying upward to avoid the shaky ground. Zoe's falling dark star attack resumed. From Misfortune's perspective, one of the falling stars briefly knocked a purple light off course. Either Syndra or Janna must have taken a hit, but they recovered. Even with the sky falling and the earth cracking beneath them, Zaya focused her attention on Misfortune and Ari. Her pain, bitterness, and hatred seemed to empower Zoe's monstrous form. Zaya revealed that when she died, she was relieved that she didn't have to go on knowing that she had been abandoned. She didn't have to go on knowing that Rakan and Nico had died as well. But then Zoe had brought her back to life, just in time for her to witness Nico escaping with her life. So not only had she been abandoned by Misfortune and Ari, Nico too was now on her list of betrayers. As Zaya was shedding tears of rage and pain, Rakan rhetorically asked their ex-teammates why they had left. Ari responded regardless. Back then she had heard their heartbeats. Rakan was dead, and Zaya was dying. Misfortune tried to save them, but as their leader, Ari had to make the choice. If they had stayed, all 5 of them would have perished. Zaya cried out that at least they would have died together. Misfortune gave her perspective, implying that though she didn't literally die in that fight, losing her teammates and friends killed a part of her. Zaya cried on Rakan's shoulder, saying that he was the only one she could trust. She didn't want to commiserate with her ex-teammates. She spoke to Rakan, saying they let him die. Rakan whispered a reply, inaudible to everyone but Xayah and Ari. Xayah clenched her fists while Ari lightly gasped. Rakan looked upward to the other guardians engaging with the monstrous Zoe. Back on the ground, Akali and Kaisa were huddled together, trying to remain safe amidst the earthquakes and falling stars. They noticed that pieces of debris were starting to be pulled in by Zoe, as if she had a strengthened gravitational pull. Butterfly-like insectoids emerged from the fissures in the ground, prompting the younger duo to flee for better cover. The insects attacked everything in sight, including the corrupted Star Guardians, who were ostensibly on the same side. As Rakan defended himself, his attack split one butterfly into dozens of smaller butterflies. Ari, Misfortune, Nico, Xayah, and Rakan worked together to dispatch the attacking insectoids, similar to how the group had once functioned long ago. Once the insects were destroyed, Misfortune swooped down to help protect the younger girls. Meanwhile, Xayah and Rakan turned to stand with the Star Guardians against the monster. As the Star Guardians began to overwhelm Zoe, her widespread attacks began to lighten. The monster took to focusing on defending itself. Zoe swatted Xayah out of the air, sending her hurtling back toward the park. Rakan dashed to help shield her from the impact. They landed in front of Misfortune, Akali, and Kaisa. Rakan was able to rise to his feet, but Xayah was injured. Apparently the attack from Zoe amplified the corruption within her, and it was overwhelming her. An also injured Misfortune slowly made her way to their side, limping and then eventually crawling. As she got closer, she could see the blackened patches of feathers on Xayah, spreading like some unnatural bruise. From the blackened patches dripped black ooze that formed a puddle beneath the corrupted guardian. Misfortune recognized it as a puddle of pure corruption. Lulu landed nearby to offer support, but her type of support was always a little different. She helped cheer up Xayah and Rakan by grouping together with them to launch an attack back at Zoe. Rakan swung the smaller Lulu around before shooting her off in Zoe's direction. As she flew, Lulu cast a spell on herself, causing her to grow to half Zoe's size before she impacted the monster in the stomach. Rakan did smile, but it was quickly replaced by a false one as he returned his attention to his beloved Xayah. Rakan held Xayah's hands and pressed his forehead against hers. A golden light swelled around them as he started to drain Xayah's corruption into himself. Xayah begged Rakan not to go through with it and weakly struggled to free herself, but Rakan continued with his sacrifice. Ari and Nico landed at the scene, just to find that Rakan had shielded himself from any possible interference. In a flash, golden light pulsed through Xayah, ridding her of any evidence of the corruption. But now the corruption was immediately evident on Rakan's body. Rakan stiffened as black ooze dripped from his eyes. He coughed and struggled to breathe. Rakan managed to smile and asked that Ari, Nico, and Misfortune protect Xayah. They agreed. Nico moved to hold Xayah back while Rakan readied himself. Rakan gathered all his power and shot himself like a spear towards Zoe's heart. Xayah cried out, unable to move from Nico's grasp. A still massive Lulu held the monstrous Zoe in place, while the speeding Rakan honed in on its target. All the available guardians synced up their attacks with Rakan. Rockets, tornadoes, starlight, hammer strikes, darkness orbs, a beam of light, and foxfire cracked Zoe's magical armor, and through that crack sailed Rakan, a star making his grand exit. The whole world went dark. Then light exploded over the city. Zoe was gone, and so was Rakan. Akali and Kaisa slowly exited their shelter. The whole experience affected the two friends quite differently. Where Akali saw the pain, corruption, and loss, Kaisa saw hope, perseverance, and victory. The Star Guardians landed, and Akali saw that Xayah looked different. Her outfit was brighter, but her dimmed eyes scanned for a person that wasn't there. The evident pain and loss tore at Akali's heart. Perhaps it was because she saw Rakan's selflessness mirrored in her best friend Kaisa. Akali and Kaisa discussed their differing perspectives, taking care not to fight again. The two agreed that they could always rely on one another, sealing it with a pinky promise. Akali already had her doubts though. She thought if it came down to it, Kaisa would sacrifice herself for the safety of others in a heartbeat. She ignored that thought, choosing to focus on the sanctity of their pinky promise. Even so, a small seed of darkness landed in her heart. Ari and the other Star Guardians scoured the city for survivors, while Syndra broke off to make sure no remnants remained of Zoe and her dark presence. Lux helped Misfortune walk, while Soraka began to theorize how to cleanse the bubbling pools of corruptive magic from the city. Xayah told the Guardians that she was going to find Rakan. Misfortune said she would help, quickly taking Xayah's side when the others brought up their concerns. Zaya still didn't trust her, but at least she no longer hated her. Zaya took off on her own. No one made any attempt to stop her. Trying to keep Zaya from searching for Rakan would have been a futile effort. The other Guardians eventually followed. Lux led her squad first. Then Ezreal and Soraka took off, leaving Ahri, Nico, and Misfortune. Ahri spoke first, saying she was sorry. She had concealed so much from Misfortune, her second in command. Namely, the fact that Zaya was alive when they left her, the fact that Nico had survived, and the fact that she went on a mission to rescue them while leaving Misfortune no way to contact her or help. Misfortune had plenty of reason to be upset, and she was. Ahri explained her actions were motivated by a fear of losing anyone else important to her. Misfortune was the last person from Ahri's original team. Ahri began to sob and collapsed to her knees. She had been under immense pressure as a leader and protector, but that didn't mean she had to do everything on her own. Misfortune pulled Nico to her and hugged both her and Ahri. Star-crossed. The newly redeemed Star Guardian Zaya took to searching the galaxy for Rakan. She ended up in Silvermere City in the Demacia cluster. While there, she began to scout for new Star Guardians that could help her along on her quest to find Rakan. Not that she couldn't depend on her old team, things were just simpler without the baggage. She came across a powerful Star Guardian wielding a giant cannon. As the Star Guardian fought against a giant darkness dog monster, Zaya prepared to assist. With one blast from her cannon, it became clear that she didn't need any help. The new Star Guardian was named Senna, with familiar Giru. Initially, Senna refused to join up with her, but Zaya convinced her when she brought up that she was looking for her lost love. Although it would be tough to guess, Senna was a hopeless romantic herself, and was also curious how Zaya had been redeemed after falling. The two continued Zaya's search for teammates. They landed on Entresol Prime in the Sun Gate sector. They found themselves at a concert in the park. Star Guardian Seraphine was putting on an interesting concert alongside her familiars Treble and Bass. Her performance consisted of battling 3 of the Darkness Dog monsters for a crowd of onlookers. Senna was skeptical about how helpful this pop star could really be. Zaya suggested that her cheerfulness could help balance out the glum nature that the 2-person team currently possessed. Seraphine started singing a song as if it were directed at Zaya and Senna. Not only did her song defeat the darkness monsters, but it also convinced the Guardians to ask her to join. Before they could be properly introduced, however, another darkness monster crawled its way out from underground. The 3 Star Guardians teamed up to defeat the monster, but Zaya realized that if she wanted these fights to go smoothly, she would have to take a leadership role in the forming team. She had never been a leader before. First she took directions from Ahri, and then Zoe. The 3 were now officially teammates, and they continued their search for others. They arrived on Hextech Minor in the Piltovan galaxy. There they found a Guardian who appeared to be practicing how to appear human. This was Oriana, with her familiar Talker. Oriana used to be a robot, but through the magic of the First Light, she was transformed into a human Star Guardian. Of course, the recruitment process wouldn't go simply. A chaotic portal opened overhead. Within the portal, Zaya saw a flashback to her old team. She saw Ahri, Misfortune, Nico, and Rakan. This prompted her to run toward the portal without thinking. Then a monster jumped out and knocked Zaya to the ground. Zaya was sure she saw Rakan in that chaotic dimension somewhere. A series of monsters followed through the portal, sealing it behind them. Oriana was quick to ally with the Star Guardians as they engaged the monsters in combat. She had already calculated what to do in the event of a monster invasion. She used her familiar Talker to draw in the group of monsters before releasing a magical burst that obliterated them all. Oriana suggested to Zaya that the probability of finding and redeeming Rakan was incredibly low. Zaya replied that if she wanted to be human, Oriana would need to factor in the strength of human emotion, namely the strength of Zaya's love for Rakan. Senna and Seraphine were quick to agree with Zaya. Oriana joined the team, hoping to learn more about humans and emotion. With the team complete, they returned to Valorant City, enrolled in high school, and started planning how to find Rakan. While Zaya had been hopping from planet to planet, she was being tailed by Ahri and Misfortune, who wanted to ensure she was safe. New dreams. Seraphine came up with the idea of documenting their team's life and training in a series of vlogs. Each vlog was centered around each of Zaya's new team members. In Seraphine's vlog, Zaya reminded her that each of the new Star Guardians were chosen for a reason. In Oriana's vlog, the Guardians battled a monster, and her familiar Talker was badly damaged. Though it appeared beyond repair, Oriana was able to fix Talker with the support of her friends. In Senna's vlog, she accidentally reminded Zaya of how hopeless finding Rakan might be, but they quickly bolstered their resolve, promising that they would find him. Everything goes on. Following the events of the Twilight Star invasion, the identities of the Star Guardians who participated was public knowledge. They were revered as heroes. Merchandise and even action figures were created in their images. Some superfans became huge collectors of the merchandise. One of these collectors was named Urgot, whose favorite guardian was Ezreal. Valorant City was rebuilt, and a statue was constructed for Lux, who was no longer around. The first star selected the high schooler Kaisa to be the next leader of a Star Guardian team. While Kaisa was taking the oath to become a Star Guardian, her best friend Akali was also being chosen. Kaisa, with her familiar Ina, was the leader. The second in command / co-leader was Akali with familiar Umi. Alongside them were their fellow high school students, Echo with familiar Waku, Talia with familiar Aru, and the mute Sona, who communicated with the help of her familiar Chitsu. Across the city, Zaya was reminiscing on her lost love while holding onto one of Rakan's feathers. That was until a breeze blew it out of her hand. Not wanting to lose her keepsake of Rakan, Zaya chased it through the halls of the high school. As she chased the feather, a wave of darkness overtook her, briefly changing her back into her corrupted form. Apparently, portions of her corruption could still return if she wasn't careful. Zaya nearly chased the feather over the edge of the rooftop, barely being stopped by Seraphine and her other teammates. Zaya struck out at them, for making her lose her keepsake of Rakan. Understanding why she was upset, Seraphine embraced Zaya. Zaya started crying on her shoulder, transforming back into her redeemed form. In the far reaches of outer space, Zoe returned to life. Although Rakan had done serious damage to her, Chaos was apparently unkillable. She searched countless planets before returning to Valorant City to enact her revenge, but by then all the Star Guardians she knew had moved on, all except for Syndra. Another Sky. On the last day of their spring break, Kaisa had gathered her teammates for a training session, but she kept getting distracted, zoning out and thinking back to Zoe's attack on Valorant City. Kaisa wondered if it had happened again, would she be able to prevent the city's destruction? Akali snapped Kaisa out of it, reminding her that nothing bad had attacked the city since they had become Guardians. Echo claimed that even so, it was better that they take time to prepare, just in case. They were all still relatively new Guardians who needed to get used to using their powers. The team concluded their training as the sun started to set. Over the days, Akali started missing the team's weekend training sessions. She was being hounded by voices in her head. Voices from those who died in Zoe's attack. When Kaisa got on Akali's case about being a responsible Star Guardian, Akali retorted that apparently that was all that mattered to Kaisa now. The two bickered for a moment before they both confessed that they had been hallucinating. Kaisa wasn't sleeping well due to her visions of Zoe's attack on Valorant City. Akali had been skipping training due to the voices she was hearing. On top of that, Akali had a growing sense of paranoia that something bad had been following her. At that moment, Kaisa and Akali were pulled into a different dimension, patterned like a chessboard. Here, Star Nemesis Fiddlesticks revealed itself. Akali froze, paralyzed in fear, but Kaisa sprung into action, transforming before Fiddlesticks disappeared. On the way out, Fiddlesticks claimed that all Star Guardians must fall. As the two returned back to the normal dimension, they heard taunts from a woman's voice. The woman revealed herself to be Morgana, and she seemed to have some sort of understanding about Fiddlesticks and that strange dimension. Over the years, Morgana had been designing a plan to destroy all light in the universe, including the Star Guardians, and ultimately the first star as well. In secret, Morgana unleashed a wave of monsters into the city, giving the new Star Guardians their first challenge. The monsters began terrorizing the citizens, prompting the Star Guardians to respond. Akali and Echo were the first on the scene. As they fought, Echo noticed Akali was moving sluggishly, and asked her to keep her focus. Akali replied that she couldn't stop thinking about Fiddlesticks. She wasn't sure if she really wanted to risk her life fighting the creatures. Kaisa arrived to help ease Akali's nerves. She still hesitated briefly, but then rejoined the fight. Sona and Talia circled around, penning the monsters in. Akali, Kaisa, and Echo began systematically dispatching them. Apparently, they had achieved their first victory. Echo joked that he wanted people to make an action figure of him, like the ones that were made of Rakan and Esmorp. Sona and Kaisa discussed how the battle seemed suspiciously too easy. Later at school, Kaisa and Akali were shocked to see their new homeroom teacher, Morgana. Unfortunately for them, however, they couldn't fight Morgana, since they couldn't risk revealing their identities as Star Guardians. Morgana was effectively hiding in plain sight. On her way home, Kaisa found herself asking the Statue of Lux for guidance. Akali caught up to Kaisa and reminded her that they could talk about anything if they needed. Kaisa then received a message from an unknown number. The message wanted her to meet up outside the city to handle a mutual problem, but she had to come alone. For this reason, Kaisa concealed her meeting from Akali and then took off toward the outskirts of Valorant City. Of course, Akali was suspicious, so she decided to follow Kaisa. While Akali was stealthily tailing Kaisa, she was intercepted by Fiddlesticks and reminded once again that she was destined to fall. When Kaisa arrived at the city outskirts, she found Syndra and Zoe. Of course, Kaisa was immediately on edge. Though Syndra was aware of Morgana, the problem she had was with Fiddlesticks. When Kaisa confirmed it was the checkerboard monster, Zoe angrily corrected her, saying it was a chessboard. Syndra revealed to Kaisa that she, Zoe, and Fiddlesticks had all been on the first team of Star Guardians. Zoe and Syndra still held a grudge against Star Nemesis Fiddlesticks for consuming their teammate Harp, but Fiddlesticks had grown strong, even stronger than Zoe, so Syndra proposed that Kaisa and her team assist in taking out the monster. The next day, Kaisa brought up the plan to Akali, who angrily refused. Teaming up with Zoe, the monster that destroyed Valorant City was out of the question. Echo and Sona were also quite unhappy with the suggestion. Akali was feeling overwhelmed. Their homeroom teacher could summon monsters that would attack the citizens at a moment's notice. She herself was being hounded day and night by a frightening monster, and now on top of that, Zoe was back. The team split and went their separate ways. Kaisa met with Syndra at Noodle Bill's. Noodle Bill's was a place Star Guardians would frequent on long nights. He even knew the Star Guardians as early as 4 generations prior to the present one. Syndra reassured Kaisa that Star Guardian teams always suffered from the drama and stress of their duties. It happened with her most recent team, and it happened with her first team. Syndra left to regroup with Zoe, while Kaisa tried once again to rally her team. Akali, Talia, Echo, and Sona reluctantly joined with Kaisa, though Akali was clearly exhausted. Fiddlesticks pulled them all into his dimension. As they began the fight, Zoe and Syndra led the charge, backed up by Kaisa, Talia, and Sona. Akali and Echo peeled off to flank the monster, hoping to catch it off guard. Zoe entered her chaotic monster form and asked Syndra to reveal her true strength by taking off her eye patch. Syndra considered it, but said she would prefer to hold off until it was absolutely necessary. The fight raged, but they were unable to make a dent against the monster. That was until Akali noticed the familiar Geist trapped inside Fiddlesticks' chest cage. She recognized this as a potential weak point. The Guardian struck at the cage, breaking it and forcing Fiddlesticks to morph back into Harp. Zoe burst into tears seeing her best friend again. She revealed that she had been killing Star Guardians in order to prevent them from falling and turning into monsters. This didn't seem to be entirely true, but her feelings were genuine. Harp faded away along with the chessboard dimension. Zoe turned to the Star Guardians and said that she was leaving for now, but she would return to kill them all. Zoe left. Syndra left shortly after, claiming that her time as a hero was done and she was a part in a darker story. She too said she would be back someday. From the outer reaches of space, Outer Guardian Neela picked up on some information. She was obsessed with hunting the strongest monsters possible, and there seemed to be a large gathering of strong opponents in Valorant City, namely Zoe, Syndra, Morgana, and Fiddlesticks. Star Guardian Neela was on her way. Back at school, the Guardians, excluding Akali, discussed the changes that had been going on. Apparently, now that Fiddlesticks was gone, Morgana was able to strengthen her influence. Her aura was disrupting the Star Guardian's abilities. Overhead there was a shooting star, one of a bright new color. There were also 2 new transfer students arriving from Keys So High, best friends Quinn and Rel. They quickly discerned that the team was a group of Star Guardians, but that was fine because they were as well. Kaisa welcomed them to her squad, bringing their team number to 7, when Akali was around, that was. Shadow of a doubt. Even though Fiddlesticks had been defeated, Akali was still having nightmarish visions. One particularly nasty vision dragged Akali back into Fiddlesticks' dimension. She heard the voices of doubt calling to her. She saw a mirror image of herself, a shadowed form, showing her the monster that she would become. The monster attacked her, prompting her to defend herself and eventually slay it. But it wasn't over. Many hands resembling those of Fiddlesticks's began to reach up from below, grabbing her and dragging her down. When she was almost fully engulfed by the hands, Kaisa emerged from the sky, reaching out to save her. On the other side of the ground, her mirror image was reaching out toward Morgana. The battle was sure to determine Akali's fate. Would she remain a Star Guardian with Kaisa, or fall and join Morgana's side? Before she had her answer, Akali jolted awake, gasping for air. While Akali lamented her situation, she questioned why she ever became a Star Guardian in the first place. At that moment, Morgana approached her with an offer of guidance. Akali impulsively transformed into her Star Guardian form, but Morgana wasn't there to fight. Instead, Morgana said that she had helped countless Star Guardians fall in the past, and Akali was simply prolonging her inevitable fate. As Akali was about to give in, Morgana was chased off by the Outer Guardian Neela. The two had faced each other before, and Morgana knew she wasn't prepared for the fight. The next week, Morgana not so subtly threatened Akali and Kaisa's family if they were to continue interfering with her plans. Unfortunately, her aura was so strong that none of the other students seemed to catch on to the threats. Akali later told Kaisa that she wished she never became a Star Guardian. She was fearful that she was destined to fall and turn into a monster like Fiddlesticks. In an attempt to raise Akali's spirits, Kaisa agreed to spend the next day with her, like they had before they became Star Guardians. They promised they wouldn't bring up any Star Guardian business for the whole day. However, Akali had lied. She had no intention of meeting up with Kaisa the next day. Instead, she went to see Morgana, hoping that she could make her inevitable fall as painless as possible. Morgana showed Akali another monster. This one was giant, and called a Dark Herald. As the Dark Herald began to attack the city, Akali said she didn't care if people died, she just didn't want to be there to see it. The other Star Guardians responded to the gigantic threat. Although Neela was excited by the prospect of battling the Dark Herald, she deferred to Kaisa as the team's acting leader. She was already an Outer Guardian, and the team needed more battle experience if they were eventually to fight and defeat Morgana. Kaisa gave her commands. Sona, Talia, and Echo were to take out the smaller monsters, while Kaisa, Rel, Quinn, and Neela took on the Dark Herald. The Dark Herald's weak point was at the top of its head, where a figure of a woman sat. Neela cleared a path, protecting the Guardians as they launched their attack. Rel stunned the Herald by ramming into its center of mass. Quinn and Kaisa attacked the exposed figure, destroying it and defeating the Dark Herald. After the Dark Herald was destroyed, dark magic was released throughout the area. Elsewhere, Morgana began to draw in massive amounts of power from the darkness, saying that this would be the end for the Star Guardians. Akali agreed, saying she couldn't wait for the Star Guardians to be destroyed. For the next couple weeks, Akali had been absent from school. Kaisa had Quinn scour the entire city for any trace of her, but they came up with nothing. Kaisa and Talia then confronted Morgana, demanding she tell them where Akali was. Of course, Morgana refused to give any helpful information. Kaisa decided that she would have to skip school and search for her friend. She deemed that her friend's safety was more important than her pristine attendance record. Kaisa caught up with Akali near the location where they first met. Akali wasn't thrilled to see Kaisa. Her struggles and concerns had been ignored for months, so when Kaisa asked her to rejoin the Star Guardians, Akali refused. It started to rain as Akali reminded Kaisa that all the Star Guardians were doomed from the start. She told Kaisa that she was going to join up with Morgana and tearfully ran away from the scene. An important battle was on the horizon, so the Guardians distracted themselves with some comforting activities. Sona and Echo went to the arcade where they had met, while Quinn watched Talia and Rel compete in a pastry eating competition at Cafe Cuties. On the city outskirts, Neela gave Kaisa some advice about the importance of bonds between teammates. After that, Neela nodded toward the shadows, where Akali revealed herself. Akali let Kaisa believe that she was ready to return to the team. She had been acting as a double agent to get close to Morgana. Unaware of Akali's true intentions, Morgana started her attack, releasing her monsters into the city. There were dozens of Dark Heralds, and countless smaller monsters. When the rest of the team was suspicious of Akali's intentions, Kaisa defended her. Nevertheless, when the team split up to take care of the monsters, Akali seemingly attacked Kaisa, and Kaisa refused to fight back. Akali laughed at how easy she was making this. Morgana teleported Kaisa and Akali to her dimension because she wanted to witness the betrayal firsthand. Morgana had already planned out how the Star Guardians would fall if Akali were to kill Kaisa. The betrayal would fracture the Guardians with close bonds, like Quinn and Rel, and Sona and Echo. Morgana ordered Akali to kill her friend, but Akali revealed that she had no intention of betraying her team. She and Kaisa stood together to fight Morgana, and they were quickly backed up by the rest of the Guardians. Morgana wasn't amused. She transformed into her Star Nemesis form to do battle. She cast her binding chains that pierced through each Guardian and rooted them in place, draining their light. Akali and Kaisa reached out toward each other and managed to emit a burst of starlight, breaking not only their chains, but the ones rooting the other Guardians as well. The Guardians called upon the First Light strength to defeat Morgana, ending the most recent threat to Valorant City. Another Sky, Wild Rift. Simultaneously with the events of Kaisa's team's fight against Fiddlesticks and Morgana, Zaya's new team was going through their own challenges. They too had to deal with the monsters that plagued the city. Zaya had begun lightly tapping into the remnants of her corruption to increase her strength. She believed she could control it though. Like Zoe, Rakan too had survived, but he was now more corrupt than ever after draining Zaya's darkness. Rakan opened a portal from his dark dimension to invade Valorant City with his dark minions. His intent was of course to destroy the Star Guardian team that was formed to find him and turn him back to the light. Using Oriana's energy tracking abilities, Zaya caught up to the corrupted Rakan, but of course she couldn't bring herself to harm him. Rakan mocked Zaya and her new teammates, but Rakan sensed the lingering bit of corruption that still dwelled within Zaya. He tried to convince her to let it take her over, so that they could be powerful together once again. Zaya managed to refuse, and Rakan slipped back away into his dimension, leaving the Star Guardians to fight against his monsters. Right as the team was on the verge of being overwhelmed, Ahri and Misfortune swooped in to provide assistance. Zaya wasn't entirely happy to be saved by her ex-teammates, but she managed to control her anger. She knew she could use their assistance if she was going to bring back Rakan. She temporarily agreed to form a 6-person team with the goal of redeeming Rakan. The group gathered at Cafe Cuties to go over their plan. Misfortune pointed out that the squad was more a go-in guns blazing type rather than a team of stealthy assassins, so that would have to be the plan. Later, Seraphine gathered the team for a study session / slumber party. The night was nearly interrupted when Chaos Dimensions started opening all around the city. However, Kaisa's Star Guardian team had it taken care of, so they were able to resume their night. Most of the team fell asleep while pretending to study, but they were quickly awakened when Talker got a lock on Rakan's location. The team moved out. Finally, the time came when Zaya and her team entered Rakan's Chaos Dimension to face him head on. The team hit him with everything they had, but he managed to emerge from the attack unscathed. The corrupted Guardians were simply much stronger than the normal Star Guardians. Senna bought the squad some time by concealing them within her Hidden Mist ability. Zaya recalled what she told Rakan right before he had sacrificed himself for her. She told him that she would break any rule to stay with him. Zaya then tapped into her corruption again and knocked her teammates out of the Chaos Dimension. She was going to face Rakan alone. The two rushed at each other, but before they exchanged any blows, Zaya was able to separate the chaos from the light within Rakan. She had managed to purify the darkness in him, redeeming him in a way similar to how he had once done for her. Another Sky, ending. Snow fell on Valorant City during winter break. All the Star Guardians were present in their street clothes, taking some time to enjoy the festivities. Akali and Kaisa were at Noodle Bill's. While there, they were approached by Star Guardian Ahri. She wanted the new group of Guardians to be brought up to speed with the ongoings of the others. Ahri directed them to speak with Zaya, who was seated closely to a freshly redeemed Rakan. All was happy with the Star Guardians. Until Kaisa was contacted directly by the Dark Star. The Dark Star informed her that this cycle of light and dark would never cease. The Dark Star told Kaisa to prepare herself because his army of servants was coming. Bond Story Revelations. These stories gave some background and context for individual Guardians and their relationships. In Kaisa's Bond story, the other Guardians go on a field trip, leaving her to take care of everyone's familiars. Kaisa tried to get the familiars to train together, but Umi, Akali's familiar, snuck away to find something fun to do instead. Kaisa and the other familiars began searching for Umi. First they checked the school, then Cafe Cuties, and Arcade World. They finally caught up to Umi at Noodle Bill's. Kaisa recognized that she needed to work on her work-life balance, so she and the familiars spent the next day relaxing at the park. In Akali's Bond story, She and Kaisa were eating ramen at Noodle Bill's. Noodle Bill gave some advice about the nature of friendship. He claimed it was like a good broth. If you put in time, effort, and love, it will be great, even if you aren't constantly there to watch it. After Akali left, Kaisa told Noodle Bill she hadn't been a great friend recently. Bill told her it would be difficult, but they would have to trust each other. Later, Akali told Kaisa about her nightmares regarding the Battle of the Twilight Star, and how she was being guided toward falling. She admitted that it was easier to imagine herself falling than to be a Star Guardian for eternity. Akali regretted admitting this and exited. With some guidance from Noodle Bill, Kaisa caught up to Akali at Lux's statue. There, they reconciled and reiterated their promise to always be there for each other. In Talia's Bond story, she accidentally left her familiar Aru at the school, prompting Kaisa to return it. After returning it, Kaisa remarked on how different Talia acted when she was at school versus when she was a Star Guardian. Talia said it was a little embarrassing, but she could explain later at Cafe Cuties. Talia revealed that some clothes suited her better than others. For example, her Star Guardian outfit made her feel like the person she wanted to be, while the school uniform did not. Akali and Kaisa took Talia to the mall and got her some new outfits. Back at Kaisa's house, Talia tried on the new clothes, but still revealed herself in her school uniform. She said it wasn't the clothes holding her back, it was herself. Even so, she still planned on burning the uniform once they graduated. In Sona's Bond story, she was being consistently late to class. When Kaisa and Akali approached her to find the reason, Sona signed to them that she would explain later at the mall. Kaisa and Akali were not as fluent in sign language as Echo was, so Sona's familiar Chizu had to translate for them. The next morning, Kaisa met Sona at the mall. It was quieter in the morning, which helped Sona think. Chizu explained that during Zoe's invasion, Sona's neighborhood suffered the worst. The noises overwhelmed her and paralyzed her in place as her town turned to rubble. She preferred to arrive late to class after all the busy noise of students died down. However, now that she was a Star Guardian, she wanted to get better at handling the noise. Later, a monster attacked the city where only Sona and Kaisa were in the area. Though Sona suggested they wait for backup, Kaisa convinced her that they were strong enough to take it on alone. Sona revealed that she would have died during the Zoe invasion if not for the bravery of a boy who had saved her life. If she had been a Star Guardian then, no one would have gotten hurt. Kaisa reminded Sona that she was a Star Guardian because she was brave, not the other way around. As the sounds of battle began to overwhelm Sona, Kaisa suggested that she think of all the noise like musical notes of the city. She did, and the symphony around her propelled her to defeating the monster. This gave her a new coping mechanism for days when the noise got overwhelming. In Echo's Bond story, Kaisa confronted Echo about misusing his time manipulation abilities. During the course of the conversation, Kaisa recognized that he was again manipulating time to steer the conversation his way. This further illustrated Kaisa's point. Echo claimed he couldn't change anything that mattered anyway, and left to work on his secret project. Weeks later, Echo invited Kaisa to see the results of his project. He had invented the Chrono Displacer to amplify his powers and allow him to travel back further in time. He wanted Kaisa's help operating the device while he went back to the past. At the time of Zoe's invasion, Echo's friend Clagor was crippled and put into a coma while saving someone else's life. Echo intended on going back to that day to warn his friend. Echo traveled back to that day multiple times, though each attempt ended in failure. He eventually realized that the person Clagor had sacrificed himself to save was Sona, who had been paralyzed in fear from the loud explosions that had been occurring. Echo reluctantly accepted Clagor's choice, and he returned to the present. In Quinn's Bond story, their class assigned a group project. Quinn quickly joined up with her friend Rel. Kaisa took the opportunity to learn about her new teammates and also joined up. Akali was upset by this, since she assumed that she would get to work with Kaisa. Quinn felt bad, but Kaisa told her that she and Akali had already been having issues. At Cafe Cuties, the group searched for something to write their presentation about. Eventually, Quinn told Kaisa about their hometown, named Kiso. Rel reminded her that she had a secret meeting, and then they left. The next day, Quinn gave a presentation about her hometown. In Rel's Bond story, Kaisa found her beating up a bully. When Kaisa reprimanded her, Rel stormed off, leaving a manga book behind. Kaisa tried to return the book at Cafe Cuties, but Rel denied that it was hers. Later at the park, Rel scared off a deer that made a child drop their ice cream cone. The park security kicked her out for this, and Kaisa told her that her actions had consequences. Rel got upset and said she was better off alone. Quinn told Kaisa that Rel was likely at the comic book store. There they found her, and they went back to Kaisa's room to hear Rel's explanation. Her parents had very high expectations for her, and would throw anything away that they viewed as distractions. So Rel kept her love for comics a secret. Quinn was her only friend that knew about it. Kaisa told Rel that they now were all part of a bigger team, and they all wanted to be friends with her. Rel accepted this, and eventually opened up about her hobbies to her teammates. In Neela's Bond story, she briefly met with Ari and Misfortune to discuss her presence in Valorant City. She revealed that her friend Lux had asked her to train the new group of Star Guardians. However, she had caught wind of a corrupted Star Guardian's presence. Ari and Misfortune promised that they would take care of Rakan, leaving Neela to her task of training the younger Guardians. As Neela sparred with Kaisa, she accidentally knocked her out. When Kaisa woke up, Neela revealed that a portion of her strength came from a monster known as Ashlesh, the Star of Joy. The monster was defeated, but she was stained with its curse. She was stronger now, but also forever joyful, unable to feel other emotions. After seeing how much her trainees grew, Neela believed that she had fulfilled her promise to Lux. Still, Neela remained in Valorant City to keep an eye out for the growing team. Legends of Runeterra missions. Card artwork in Legends of Runeterra showed some familiar Guardians teaming up to accomplish a couple missions. Soraka, Lulu, and Jinx were in a spaceship in the outer galaxy. There, they discovered a Star Guardian energy signature trapped within a monster. Jinx impulsively pressed down on the throttle and sent the ship flying in the monster's direction. When they arrived at the trapped Star Guardian's location, Soraka was able to free her, while Jinx and Lulu fought against the monster. Having finally been freed, Gwen and her familiar Tai joined the fight against the giant monster, managing to slay it. Back in Valorant City, Kaisa was at school when she noticed a monster attacking the city's center. She contacted Senna, who was at the arcade, Talia, who was at Noodle Bill's, and Quinn, who was feeding pigeons at the park. They teamed up to defeat the giant insectoid monster who was attacking the city. Sources. The sources for this video include the short stories, New Stars, Starfall, The Slumber Party Summoning, and The Twilight Star by Ariel Lawrence. The short story, Twin Stars by Kat Cherish. The comics, Star-Crossed by Jared Rosen and Callie Miller. The visual novel, Another Sky by Jared Rosen, Taylor Dinwiddie, and Ty Sheedlow. And finally, the visual novel, Another Sky, Wild Rift by Ty Sheedlow. Thank you for watching.